Hey everybody, this is Dave here at Pulp Alley, and in this video I want to talk with you about what makes Pulp Alley different. Pulp Alley is a tabletop adventure game. We play it mostly set in the 1930s, but it's really designed to be able to play all of the different stories and genres and settings that were published in the old pulp magazines, the old serials, and that sort of stuff. And that covered a lot of ground, from horror to sci-fi to westerns and on and on and on. But Pulp Alley is the game that we designed. We started about 10 years ago on this. It took us about 3 years of playtesting and designing before we even published it. And now I want to share some ideas about what makes it different. What do I really enjoy about it? And we still play Pulp Alley to this day. Every single week we play at least one game. So let's talk about some of the stuff that makes it different. So number one is compared to a lot of other skirmish level games, you really have the freedom to design the sorts of characters that you want to make. You're not limited by, okay, well, you have to start with this template, and then you got to do this and that and this. It's a much broader and much more open way of designing characters. There are tons and tons of different abilities and things that you can do and different character types. So lots of fun creating your own characters. But if you're not into that, we do have pre-made character cards as well. That was number one. Number two is we have story-driven scenarios. Our scenarios are really about the plot points. The plot points that are placed on the table represent the real reason why you're there and what you're supposed to be doing. Are you there to rescue the child? Are you there to defuse the bomb? Are you there to recover the artifact? You know, those are the plot points, the reason for that story. And by following that story, you're going to be far more successful than if you just go into the scenario and want to turn it into a normal skirmish game that you just blast the other side. Now, I'm not saying that's not lots of fun sometimes, because yeah, I do that too sometimes. But most of the time, you're going to have a better experience if you kind of try to follow the story. The injuries in Pulp Alley actually matter. When your heroes get injured, it's going to, affect their skills and their ability to roll dice and how big their dice can be. So the injuries really matter. You don't just simply go through it and go, okay, well, now I'm down to 2 wounds. Okay, now I'm down to 1 wound. You know, the injuries actually have an impact on the character, and that's pretty important when you're trying to pull down, one of those big, beefy characters. I think the next one, and this one is a big one for me, is that the fights actually represent fights. One of the big reasons why we decided to make our own game is because we were absolutely disgusted by the way most skirmish games handle combat. Most of the time, you have the thrill of attacking a fence post. In other words, the enemy just stands there and has absolutely nothing when you're attacking, and that is so freaking stupid. That's not at all how a real fight should be handled. In a real fight, both people are involved, and there should be an opportunity there for either character to get injured. It's the number one reason why most people don't start a fight, is because they know they could get hit too. But in games, for some reason, we've taken that out of the equation and we turn it into, if I come around this corner and attack you, I can just shoot at you and you have to stand there and do absolutely nothing. And then later in the game, when it's your turn, I'll just stand here and let you shoot me. So freaking stupid. So that's not the way Pulp Alley works. When Pulp Alley, you come around that corner and you open up with your revolver, you better be ready, because the other side is probably going to shoot back. And it creates a situation, a fight in Pulp Alley that's called a shootout. Very, very cool. Another thing that I like about Pulp Alley is that it does not have action points. There are certain things that you can do. Every character, when they activate, every character can normally move. Every character can then, after they move, they can either fight or they can perform an action. And after that, their activation ends. So you don't have to spend action points on, well, I'm going to spend an action point to do this, spend an action point to do that. You know, it's just goofy. And then the whole point of, like, someone was showing me a game where you, at the start of each turn, you had to count up how many action points you had based on how many characters. You know, it's just a goofy and time-consuming waste of your gaming time, when you should really expect every character to activate and have certain things that they can do. Which leads me to my next thing that I like best about Pulp Alley, and that is that every single character gets to do something. You know, if they're on the table, the expectation is that they're involved in the scenario and they're involved in the game. Someone was showing me another game where you had to spend action points to activate your characters, so you could actually run out of action points, so that then you had some characters that just stood around and did nothing. Why? You know, I painted up the character, I bought the miniature, I painted it up, I put it on the table, and now it just stands there. It's just so goofy. It's just one of those dumb things that people put into games that they probably don't even play themselves. If they actually played the game, they'd probably do that differently. All right, the next thing that I like about Pulp Alley is that there is no rolling to see how far your character moves normally, unless you're under the effects of like a horror or something like that. Normally, you're going to get to either move up to 12 inches. You can move up to 6 inches and still perform an action. But you're not sitting there rolling to see how far you move like you're playing Snakes and Ladders or Chutes and Ladders or some other children's game like that. That's just goofy. There was one game I saw where the guy says, well, but you get to roll 2 dice and pick the best one. You know, like, so every character I move, I've got to sit there and roll a dice. And then if I want to charge you, I have to make some kind of like charge check or something. So then I'm rolling 3 or 4 dice before I even get to move my character. That's just the sort of stuff that when you actually play test a game, you go, oh, well, that sounds like a good idea, until you actually play it. Get that stuff out of there and make Pulp Alley a fun and playable game. Also, no WYSIWYG. None of that what you see is what you get. Pulp genre is too big to have that sort of dogma, that sort of doctrine in the pulp setting. You should be able to say a character, well, you look at a character, you go, well, I don't see that they have a gun, so they must not have one. So, you know, it's that sort of silliness that you shouldn't just assume that the character has everything visible on them. That's just not the real world. It's not the world of the pulps. It's not the world of the serials either. And I guess an example that you could kind of think of is, and I'd love for somebody to prove me wrong on this one, but like, I'm fairly sure there's not a single photograph of Al Capone carrying or holding any kind of firearm. Do you really think that he wasn't carrying a pistol? You know, chances are he probably had something on him. So the idea that you've got to have that visible so that the opponent knows that, it's just kind of silly. In the pulp setting, you got to take your chances sometimes. Plus, you can always just look at their roster and say, oh, well, yeah, he does have a pistol somewhere, because, you know, use your brain a little bit and you know Al Capone's going to have a pistol on him somewhere. So another thing that I really like about Pulp Alley is the way the initiative works. And although at the very start of the game you do roll off to see who's going to start with the initiative, thereafter, after you get into the game, it's really controlled by events that are happening during the scenario. If you want to get the initiative, then you've got to work for it. You've got to do something that is going to steal the initiative away from the other player. And if you are the player that's holding on to the initiative, that becomes part of your tactics and strategy to try and make sure you can maintain the initiative. Very, very cool the way that works. So one other thing I like is the way the dice work in Pulp Alley. Although you do roll dice, and yeah, it means something in the game, I'll tell you something that is also cool about it is that you decide. So unlike in most skirmish games where you roll the dice and then you look it up on a chart or some silliness where you find out what that means, In Pulp Alley, after you roll dice, then you frequently get to decide what that means. So when you look at your dice, you could say, well, I've got a 6, I've got a 7, and I've got a 10. You rolled a 4 and a 5, so I'm going to block both of your hits and still deliver 1 point of damage to you. And you could play that so many different ways. One, you could just say, I'm going to go for broke. I'm going to put everything I have into it. I don't care if I get hurt. I just want to take you down. Or you can kind of mitigate some of the damage and try and reduce your chances of being hurt. There's so much thought and decision that goes into playing Pulp Alley that makes it a thinking person's game. A lot of fun if you really enjoy, being a participant in the game rather than just a dice rolling person. I don't know. Have I gone over 10? I may have actually gone to like 11 or something. Anyway, boys and girls, I'd love to get your comments. I'd love to get your top 10, or at least what did I miss that you really enjoy about Pulp Alley. Leave them in the comments down below. While you're at it, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you're a subscriber, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.